Chapter 1, The Storm. In the village of Sparks, the day was ending. The pale winter sun had begun to sink behind a bank of clouds in the west, and shadows darkened the construction field behind the Pioneer Hotel, where workers labored in the gloom. Winter rain had turned the ground to a soup of mud. Stacks of lumber and piles of brick and stone stood everywhere, along with the buckets of nails, tools, old windows and doors, anything that might be useful for building houses. Though the daylight was almost gone, people worked on. They were trying to accomplish as much possible because they could see that a storm was coming. But at last, someone called, "Time to quit!" And the workers sighed with relief and began to pack up their tools. One of the workers was a boy named Dune Harrow, 13 years old, who had spent the day hauling loads of boards from one place to another and trying to measure and cut them as necessary lengths. When he heard the call, he set down the rusty old saw he'd been using and looked around for his father. The workers stumbling across the field were no more than shadowy figures now. It was hard to tell one from the other. Ahead of them loomed the hotel, a few of its windows shining dimly with the light of candles lit by those too young or old or ill to be outside working. "Father," Dune called, "where are you?" His father's voice answered from the same distance behind him. "Right here, son, coming, wait for," and then came a sound that made Dune whirl around. First a shattering crash, and then a shriek of a kind he'd never before heard from his mild-mannered father. Dune ran, squelched through the mud. He found his father sprawled on the ground beside a broken window pane that had been leaning against a pile of bricks. "What happened?" Dune cried. "Are you hurt?" His father struggled to his knees. In a strangled voice, in his hoarse, strangled voice, he heard, "Tripped, fell on the glass, my hand." The others had gathered now, and they helped him up. Dune took his father's arm. Enough light remained in the sky for him to see what had happened. The palm of his father's hand was sliced open, gushing blood. One of the men standing nearby tore off his shirt and wrapped it around the wound. Make a tight fist," the man said. Dune's father curled his fingers, wincing. "Blood stained the shirt. We have to get to the doctor," Dune said. "Yes, that cut needs stitching up," said the man who'd given his shirt. "Go quick, and maybe you can make it to the village before it rains." "Can you walk, father?" Dune asked. "Oh, yes," said his father in a weak voice. "Might need another," he trailed off, holding out his hand, and Dune saw that the shirt wrapped around it had already soaked with blood. "Ice could slow the bleeding," someone said, "but we don't have any." A woman took off her scarf and passed it to Dune, and another man ripped his strips of cloth from his shirt. Once the injured hand was wrapped in these, Dune and his father started across the field. "You'll need a lantern," cried a boy, one of Dune's friends, Chet Nome. Go on ahead. I'll get one and catch up with you." They walked as quickly as they could, but it seemed unlikely they'd avoid getting wet. A few raindrops were already drifting down. Dune felt their light, cold touch on his face. Sparks from the city of Ember, where sun and rain alike were unknown. 4 rainstorms had swept over the land. The first had terrified the people of Ember, who thought something dreadful had gone wrong with the sky. A voice called to them from behind, and Chet came running up. "Here," he said, handing Dune a lantern made of a can punched with holes and containing a burning candle. "And listen," he added, "a roamer has arrived wanting shelter at the hotel. Tell people that if the rain stops, they'll be trading in the plaza tomorrow morning." "All right," said Dune. He and his father turned again toward the town and hurried on. "Is the pain very bad?" Dune asked. "Not too bad," said his father, whose face was unnaturally white. "It is bleeding a lot. Dr. Hester will know how to stop it." Dune said, though he wasn't sure of that. The doctor did the best she could, but there was a great deal she couldn't cure. They passed a grove of trees, thrashing in the wind. Behind the trees, a little distance off the road, a tall building loomed. A patch of blackness glowed where a section of its roof had fallen in. "They still haven't fixed it," said Dune as they went past, but his father didn't even look up. The damaged building was called the Ark, the place where the people of Sparks stored their food supplies. The first raindrop of the winter had been too much for one of the many rotten spots in the roof. Beams and clunks of tile fell inward. Shelves toppled. Jars and crocks broke and spilled. Sacks of grain tore open. And rats got to the food before the cave-in was discovered. Even to begin with, there had been barely enough food stored in the Ark to get everyone through the winter. After that storm, a great part of the food was ruined. Father, Dune said, press your hurt hand tight with your other hand. That might keep it from bleeding so much. His father nodded and did as Dune said. The rain came harder. In the last rays of evening light, Dune saw the lines of water lying like silver pins in the air. He put up the hood of his jacket, shivered. When he was faced with troubles, Dune usually looked for solutions and took action. But tonight he was feeling disheartened. So much about the winter in Sparks had been hard. People were ill with coughs and fevers, and some of them had died. They were hungry nearly all the time, and there had been one accident after another. A candle flame caught a curtain and set a house on fire. A toddler wandered outside at night, fell into the river, and drowned. There was a hole in the Ark's roof, and now the gash in his father's hand. Misfortunes came from every direction, it seemed, and Dune could see no way to make things better. In a few minutes, they came to the town. People had drawn their curtains and closed their shutters against the wind so that streets were dark, except for where a narrow line of candlelight showed here and there at a windowsill. Nearly everyone had gone inside, but they spotted Mary Waters darting from a doorway with her coat pulled all up over her head. Dune called to her, "Mary!" She turned and strode toward them. She was the strongest and most clear-headed of the town's 3 leaders. Lately, with food supplies so short and a few citizens of Sparks starting to grumble about how everything would be better if those strangers were sent away, Mary had stood firm as a rock in defense of the Emberites. "We are all the people of Sparks now," she declared again and again. "That's what we decided, and we'll stick to it." Now she frowned with concern at Loris Harrow's wrapped hand. "What happened?" she asked. Dune's father explained in a few words. We're going to the doctors," said Dune, "and a roamer has just arrived at the Pioneer, so there will be trading tomorrow if the rain stops." "Good," said Mary. "Maybe he'll have something we need. Go quick now, and that hand needs attention." They hurried on, pausing only twice more to mention the roamer to passerby. The doctor's house was at the far end of town. By the time Dune and his father reached it, the rain was coming down hard. Dune pounded urgently on the door, and in a moment it opened, and there stood Lena Mayfleet, staring at them in astonishment. Her little sister Poppy clung to her leg, whimpering. "Oh," Lena cried, "come in, what's wrong? You're soaked." Just seeing Lena's face, alarmed though it was, made Dune feel a little better. Lena was his closest friend. Together they had found the way out of their dying city of Ember and brought the rest of the Ember's people out as well. Dune didn't see Lena very often these days. Since he lived at the Pioneer and she lived at Dr. Hester's house, he thought she looked thinner since he'd seen her last. "I've hurt my hand," Dune's father said. "I need the doctor." "She's not here," said Lena. "She's with a child who has a fever, but Miss Myrtle can help." Miss Myrtle was at that moment descending the stairs. She had been Lena's neighbor in Ember and now was like a mother to her and Poppy. She peered down, and when she saw Dune and his father, she quickly smoothed her hair and tucked in her shirt. Behind her came Torrin, the doctor's nephew, a boy a little younger than Lena, with a narrow face and a tuft of hair that stood up above his forehead as if the wind had lifted it and forgotten to put it back down. The 2 of them hurried to the new arrivals. Torrin's small blue eyes popped with curiosity. "What happened?" he said. He hurt his hand. "Can I see?" He crowded up close to Dune's father. "Ew, so much blood." Torrin said, Miss Myrtle, step aside, please. You and Dune get candles and come with me. Lena, I'll need boiled water and clean rags. This way, Loris This way, Loris. Well, we'll do the best we can until Dr. Hester gets back. In the doctor's room, Mrs. Myrtle sat Dune's father down and had him lay his arm on the table next to him. She bent over his hand. I wish we had eyes, she said. It might slow the bleeding, but they had none. The last roamer carrying blocks of ice from the mountains had come through town 7 weeks ago, and all he'd brought was long melted. There are splinters of glass in this cut, Miss Myrtle said. Dune and Torrent, hold your candles right here so that I can see. Suddenly the windows of the room flashed white. Both Dune and Torrent jolted the candles they were holding and dripped hot wax onto Dune's father's hand. Miss Myrtle cried out, "What was that?" And a second later came a crack and a rumble like the sky was breaking apart. "It's only lightning," said Torrent, as if he hadn't jumped himself. "We're having a thunderstorm." Dune steadied his hand, but had felt a moment of panic at the flash and rumble. He remembered that someone had told him about a thing called lightning, a bolt of electricity that came sometimes in storms. He had not known how to picture a bolt of electricity. He thought maybe it would be a kind of shudder like what he'd felt once when he touched the wires of a wall socket back in Ember. Maybe there would be some spark with it, or some kind of twinkling. Now, holding his candle over his father's bloody palm, he glanced at the window every time a jagged line of light split the sky from top to bottom. This was a power like nothing he'd ever seen. It struck him through with awe. Somehow it was electricity. But how could a jagged line of light be the same thing that the old generator in Ember produced from the river water? How could someone that vanished in an instant be the same thing? How could something that vanished in an instant be the same thing that made a lamp glow all evening? He saw now that that electricity was nothing that people had made. It was part of the world, and sometimes, in some mysterious way, people were able to capture it. Miss Myrtle frowned and muttered over her work. "I wish Hester would get here," she said. "I can't see whether I have this properly cleaned. Where's Lena with that water?" The lightning came again, like a white root shooting down from the clouds. When the thunder followed, Dune felt its rumble deep inside himself, almost like a stern and powerful voice giving him an order he did not understand. Lena was outside at the backyard pump, pulling the pump handle up and pushing it down, up and down, making water spurt out to fill the pot and getting splattered by rain the whole time. She felt furiously impatient. In Amber, you turned on a faucet and hot water came right out. If she'd been in Amber now, she'd have had this pot filled in a minute, and she wouldn't be getting wet and cold. And at that instant, the whole sky lit up, suddenly and brilliant. She staggered backward and cried out, but a terrible roar drowned her voice, leaving the water pot behind. She fled into the house, and as she crossed the main room, the door burst open, and Dr. Hester lurched in, coat flying, scarves whipping around, water streaming from her hair. "What's happening?" Lena cried. Is the sky splitting apart? The doctor slammed the door behind her, but not before a gust of wind shot in and blew out the fire in the fireplace, leaving the room in darkness. Again, the light flashed outside, and again came a deafening bang. Poppy screamed, and Lena ran to pick her up. "Hester," Miss Myrtle called from the other room. "Please come, we need you." Another flash of light widened the windows, followed by a roar. "Thunderstorm," said the doctor, struggling out of her soaked coat. "Will it hurt us?" Lena asked, holding tight to Poppy, who was wailing. "It will if the lightning hits you," the doctor said. "Lightning sets things on fire." She tossed her coat on a chair and hurried off. "Fire from the sky?" Lena shuddered. "In Ember, the sky never let loose water or ice or stabs of fire. It never made a noise. It was always dark and still and quiet. In Ember, the weather of every day was the same." The doctor and Miss Myrtle worked over Loris Harrow's hand for nearly an hour. Dune, Lena, and Torrent grew weary from holding the candle to light the operation. Finally, Dr. Hester sighed and stood up. "I think we've got all the splinters out," she said. "I just can't see well enough to tell for sure." We'll watch you for signs of infection." Dune's father smiled faintly. He hadn't cried out as his hand was being propped, but his face was gray. "I know you did the best you could," he said. "You and Dune must stay here tonight," said Miss Myrtle. "You can't go out in that storm." "Thank you," said Dune's father. "We're grateful, and I almost forgot to mention a roamer is coming into town tomorrow. We may be able to replenish our supplies." "Maybe," said the doctor, "if we can find anything to trade with." She made up a bed for Dune's father on the couch. Dune slept on the window seat with an old quilt wrapped around him. Upstairs, Poppy climbed into Lena's bed, too afraid to sleep by herself, and Lena lay listening to the pounding rain and thinking about the city that had been, until just 9 months ago, her home. The city of Ember had been dying. Its food supplies were running out. Its buildings were old and crumbling, and worst of all, its electricity was failing. Without electricity, the city would plunge into complete and lasting darkness before it was under the ground, where no sun shone. The people of Ember hadn't known that, though Ember had been their entire world. But as gloomy as Ember had been, it was the place Lena was used to. She missed the job she'd had there, running fast through the streets as a messenger, seeing different places and different people every day. She missed a comfortable apartment where she and Poppy had lived, first with their grandmother, and then, after their grandmother died, with Miss Myrtle. Ember was a dark place, it was true, but in the daytime, huge lamps lit the streets, and at night, at least until 9 o'clock, when the city's electricity was switched off, the houses were cozy and bright inside. You flicked a switch and the lights shone, bright enough to read by a draw or play a game of checkers. You didn't have to deal with candle drips or drafts that blew out the flames. You didn't have to constantly feed a fire with wood. In winter, Dr. Hester had said to her one recent evening when Lena wanted to draw but they couldn't spare a candle, "We live half of our lives in darkness." More than half, Lena had thought. The days were short in winter, clouds often covered the sun, and the darkness followed you into the house and lurked in corners and up near the ceiling. Everywhere, the glow of candles and hearth fires didn't reach. Lena knew it didn't make sense to miss Ember, and yet Ember's dangers were at least familiar. Here they were new and strange. You could be frozen in a snowstorm, blistered by poison oak, attacked by bandits. She'd never seen these, but someone had told her about them. Bitten by snakes or eaten by wild animals. Now there was lightning to add to the list. Why are there so many hard and dangerous things in the world? Lena once asked Dr. Hester, but the doctor only shrugged. "It gives us useful work," she said. "There are always going to be people who need help. But on a night like this, with the sky flaming and roaring and the rain battering down, Lena didn't want to think about useful work. She pulled Poppy close against her. Somewhere far away, she heard a high, eerie howl. Was it the wind? Was it a wanderer lost in the storm? She tugged the covers up over her ears. She felt surrounded by a darkness that was different from the darkness of Ember, but just as frightening.